I believe you are quite aware the situation has changed since last we spoke.
The truth is still the truth, and a bargain is still a bargain.
And Mayor Cermak is now deceased.
Yes. What does that have to do with our contract?
I do not recall signing a contract with you, Mr. Allan.
We had a verbal agreement. I'm sure my uncle here will attest to that.
Nathan, please. You're being most rude.
But Dawes reacted just as I knew he would.
Lewis, as a family man, I quite understand your position. As for you, young Mr. Heller, you should not have spoken to the papers of this. It was a breach of confidence.
Nothing was said of our arrangement being a confidential one. Besides which, I was in fact discreet.
How so?
I didn't tell the reporters why I was offered the job at the fair. Void our deal, sir, and I'm going to be put into an embarrassing light. I will have to inform the press of your involvement.
This reeks of blackmail, young man.
It reeks of business. Our arrangement is binding in my view, and if you feel differently, I'll be noisy about it.
Nathan.
I'm not a big wheel like you, General, but us little wheels can get good and goddamn squeaky when we don't get our grease.
My secretary will have contracts ready for you to sign this afternoon at 4. Please return and sign them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm Robcasting you from right here in the Robservatory. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 1034. This is going to be a long show. I'm telling you right now. I'm fired up. I've been thinking about a lot of things. I'm going to share them all. It's kind of, I guess that's what you want me to do. And I got some letters to read. I got stuff to show. The first thing up, our beloved member, Brian Erdy, very talented man. He's made a video, I guess, a sequel, you could call it. He's made a video of his. It's kind of where he lives and works, but it's also the inside of his mind, and it is a great cornucopia of childhood memories, and carefully curated. But I don't need to tell you when I can show you, and it's called Beyond MySpace.
is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
Seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
Well, the gauntlet has been thrown down, people. Let's see what you can do. If you want to send me a video like that, I'll play it. That video was 7.5 minutes long. I'd prefer maybe 5 minutes or shorter, but hey, I got to give it to Brian. What a great video. Look at that cinematography. I mean, who would have thought you can fly a drone around your own? Like, that'd be really cool. I'm not much of a drone pilot myself because I haven't had much experience, but that was a fantastic video. So thank you, Brian Erdy. So much of those toys. Those are, I have a sort of a differing philosophy in terms of what I collect, in the sense that I've always been upgrading. Like, I had every single original Kenner. None of them were carded. I had every single Kenner original Star Wars figure up past Return of the Jedi. I had the entire collection. Yes, I had the vinyl Jawa, but it was all open. Actually, I had like 4. I sold them all because then I started collecting 12-inch figures, and then they were the Kenner figures, and now, it's Hot Toys Star Wars figures, endless. It's ridiculous. But I really loved seeing that collection of specifically things that meant something to Brian at various parts of his life. I mean, it's a really great collection. I really Really, really loved it. Now, I have a really interesting letter I wanted to read from this. This comes to us from Corey Van Castle Cook. Corey Van Castle Cook, and I know that was a tough name, but they were nice enough to spell it and tell me how to pronounce it. So Corey Van Castle Cook writes, this is a letter that he wrote in response to the Superman trailer. Nana Korobi Yaoki. For those of you not up on your Japanese, which I just murdered, it's a proverb that translates to fall down 7 times, get up 8. It emphasizes the importance of resilience and perseverance. That sentence could easily be the epigram of all human history. Civilizations rise and fall, wars come and go, peace reigns and is subjugated, and bright shining democracies descend into brutal fascist dictatorships. History echoes. Furthermore, it sings. I believe sincerely that our music will continue until discord crushes the human race under a mountain of animosity, or the better angels of our nature harmonize humanity into a perpetual golden age. Lately, I've been thinking that humans have been falling down a lot. Moreover, we're having a difficult time getting up. The reasons are legion. Everything from our own selfishness, economic disasters, governments that care more about billionaires and the bottom line than they do about people, otherization based on race or gender, and a myriad of other considerations. Social media and hate baiting or rage engagement has only compounded these problems. Yet more than anything, I think it is our profound lack of empathy and compassion for our fellow humans that has made this issue exponentially worse. In fact, people like James White of the Alpha and Omega Apologet Church and theologian Joe Rigney have gone so far as to call empathy a sin. Empathy, to White, Rigney, and others of their ilk, is dangerous, toxic, or as Elon Musk put it, the fundamental weakness of Western civilization. As a Christian, the concept of empathy as a sin could not be more antithetical to the teachings of Jesus Christ. In point of fact, I think it is a profoundly evil idea. Our inability, or even worse, our conscious decision not to understand the lived-in experience of people who are different from us politically, religiously, artistically, ethnically, has caused immense physical, mental, and emotional pain. Personally, it is in these moments of darkness that I turn to movies for solace and succor. Enter James Gunn's upcoming film, Superman. I say this in all earnestness and without a shred of hyperbole. Superman is the movie we desperately need right now. On Wednesday, May 14th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, DC Studios dropped the first official trailer for James Gunn's Superman, and I was overwhelmed. The color scheme, the visuals, the soundtrack, all of it made me feel like I was 10 years old again. Of course, the Snyder Bros and those who are economically invested in the anger algorithm defecated in their diapers and wailed to the high heavens. But I don't want to give them any more airtime. I hope they enjoy their box of misery. I'll be over here, smiling with anticipation. One of the most discussed elements of Gunn's trailer was how much Superman seemed to be getting his Kryptonian keister kicked. Put aside for a moment the fact that it addresses the often heard complaint that Superman is too impregnable. I want to discuss an important element people keep ignoring, namely, how often Superman keeps getting back up. The fundamental tenet of Stoicism is that we can't control what happens to us. We can only control how we respond to it. The Man of Steel exemplifies this. Superman can't control how any one person is going to respond to his actions. He can't control it when the next kaiju attacks Metropolis. He can't control it if his fellow superhumans are going to turn on him. Yet in spite of all of this, Superman continues to make the virtuous choice, the right choice. He is meant to inspire the people around him. That's why my favorite sequence in the whole trailer is when Superman crashes into the sidewalk and someone helps him get up. Helping others is what Superman is all about. When Superman says, "Hey buddy, eyes on me," and then soars into the stratosphere, it's not just a pithy quip, but an invitation for us to look up, to be kind, to be empathetic, to be compassionate. Superman shouldn't reflect the world should reflect Superman. In a time when we are so self-absorbed, when Instagram and selfies are more important than sympathy and sacrifice, Superman's fundamental goodness is a frank reminder of the potential of what we can be. Another aspect I appreciated was framing the initial trailer around Lois's interview with Superman. While some were upset at the defensiveness and lack of composure from Superman, who would that be? And their arguments are valid, I was more interested in Lois's approach to the interview. I've always believed that integrity and strong ethics are cornerstones to effective and authentic journalism. Any journalist worth their salt stays informed, asks difficult questions, and doesn't shy away from where the truth leads them. It's a lot like science in that way. I admired Lois's ability to approach the interview objectively, despite her romantic involvement with Superman. Additionally, despite Superman's emotional reaction, Lois persists in her line of questioning. Sadly, we live in a world where objective truth is being eroded. People can't even agree on what constitutes the truth anymore, even when verifiable facts and statistics are presented before them. Instead, gaslighting rules the day. In an age where we're forced to deal with specious terms like alternative facts and fake news, Lois, and by extension James Gunn, reminds us, as Winston Churchill said, the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, and ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. I recognize that James Gunn's latest Superman trailer didn't work for everyone. I would argue that the inability to successfully market movies as in years past is a significant reason. However, I choose to focus on how this trailer made me feel. Hopeful, and above all, aspirational. May we all strive to be aspirational and follow this iteration of Superman's tagline. Look up. I love your channel, and I always appreciate your cogent, insightful, and humorous takes on all things pop culture. You have my permission to read this on air. If you do, please note that my name is pronounced Corey Van Castle Cook. Keep on keeping on, and happy belated birthday. Sincerely, Corey Van Castle Cook. This is why I love you guys, because my audience writes letters like this. Now, I'm not saying y'all have to write letters to me. I'm just saying that I appreciate when I get something like this. It's meaningful to me. It means, not only are people watching this, but they're thinking about all this maelstrom of stuff that's going on around us all the time. One of my pet peeves, and I get this, a couple times a week, is people don't, if I'm talking about anything other than movies, people don't like that. People they say stick to movies. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I've watched movies about all kinds of things when I was growing up. I'll tell you, superhero movies and Star Wars movies are not even my favorite movies. And I would like to think of myself as a person of substance. And I was thinking about this, and it made me want to do a show today for a number of reasons. And one of the things, we talk about a lot, we talk about identity politics. And to be honest, over the last 15 years, I've been rather perplexed by the discourse that's happened. And identity politics perplexes me because when I was growing up, your identity was sort of defined not necessarily by you, but it was the culmination of all the things that you were. When I was a kid, I played boys club basketball. I snow skied. I loved movies and Star Trek. I read lots of horror novels. I got really interested in music, especially classical music and soundtracks, but then later, the Second Invasion from Britain. I loved reading my World Book encyclopedias. I liked going to play Army in the woods. I liked swimming in Lake Washington. I liked sailboating. I liked all different kinds of things. And these were all things that I went out and did. And they represented sort of who I was. But collectively, I would like to think that they represented a certain curiosity about the world around me. I wasn't particularly interested in what people thought of me. Of course, everybody wants to be liked. But I was more interested in gathering people around me and let's go have an adventure. Let's go do this thing together. Let's share in an experience that we could then talk about, hopefully about how awesome it was. That was kind of how I grew up. And I guess that was a good way to be. I don't know if my religious upbringing had something to do with that. I'm going to get to that later. But I think about things that happened that were significant in terms of what made me think. Wasn't necessarily sure. This Star Trek and the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits and the movies that I was watching, War of the Worlds. I mean, I've talked about this a lot when I was 5 years old. One of the things that really struck me when I saw War of the Worlds, which was 1953's Byron Haskin directed War of the Worlds. It was by far my favorite movie. It's the greatest thing I'd ever seen as a child, until I'd seen, of course, Planet of the Apes. And after Star Trek. One of the things that really stuck with me was my best friend at the time, Jeff Swafford. He was Catholic. I was raised Jewish. And I went to his first communion. I would go to church. St. Monica's? Was it St. Monica's? And he would come to temple. We exchanged our religious upbringing. Neither one of our families were particularly religious, but in War of the Worlds, a priest gets fried. I mean, the aliens come out of the gully, and a priest starts walking, lo, though I've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Well, you should, motherfucker, because you are about to be fried by alien extraterrestrials that don't believe in your God. And when I was 5 years old, I couldn't believe it. It was the most transgressive thing I had ever seen. I could not. I told Jeff about it. I told my mom about it. I'm like, you're not going to believe what happened. And that movie came out in 1953, and I was 5, man. I was 5, and I knew that the Martians had crossed a big line. At the time, you don't kill a priest, but the Martians did. That told me all I needed to know about them. We got to get these guys off the planet. I don't mean to misgender anyone. Never really knew what Martians, what kind of gender do they have? Don't know. Maybe we only saw Martian soldiers, although we only saw 1 in the movie. Actually, 2. And if you really are counting. But it was great stuff, and I loved it. But it made me ponder the secrets of the universe. But I'll tell you what really stuck with me. When I was in the 4th grade, and in the 4th grade, most of the 4th grade I was 9 years old, and I was in Mrs. Walton's class. And there were some interesting things that happened when I was in the 4th grade. I was in the rocketry club. I could join the rocketry club in the 4th grade because you could launch rockets. And Mr. Van Winkle, that was his real name, Mr. Van Winkle, who was a 6th grade teacher, he ran the rocketry club. And I got to join the rocketry club, so I got to make Estes model rockets, and we fired them off after school, on school grounds. It was fantastic. Loved it. So the 4th grade, I could join the rocketry club. Mrs. Walton read John Christopher's The White Mountains to us. And, of course, that was my Harry Potter, The White Mountains, The City of Gold and Lead, and The Pool of Fire. It took her so long to read, I had to go out and buy it. I got all 3 of those books, tore through them. I've never read the 4th book. I don't think that existed back when I was 9 years old. But the other thing that happened when I was 9 years old that was Star Wars came out when I was 9. Actually, Star Wars came out right after my birthday in May. As a matter of fact, we are 5 days away from the 38th anniversary of Star Wars. 48th anniversary of Star Wars. The true Star Wars Day, May 25th, 1977, was the day Star Wars came out. I had my 10th birthday 10 days previous to that. But that wasn't the Star Wars changed my life, and it was a big deal. But there was something else that happened that year that was even bigger. And that was the TV miniseries Roots. Let me ask you all a question. Do you know who Kunta Kinte is, or was, or is? Do you? Raise your hands. Now, it's hard to explain because there was only 2 networks. There really wasn't cable in 1976 and 1977. But when Roots came out, Alex Haley, it's based on a book by Alex Haley, and it was about African slaves, and the entire slavery was now writ large on our television screens in a way that no one had ever seen before. And based on a huge best-selling book that, by the way, I read it later, but in the 4th grade there was a girl named Lisa Schultz. And I thought she was pretty, but she was smarter than me. And I didn't think I was the smartest person in the world, but she was smarter than me. She was way smarter than me. And she, in the 4th grade, she read Roots because it was coming out. And you know what? She didn't just carry it around for show. I knew Lisa Schultz was reading that damn book. All like 1,000 pages of it. She read it. She was smarter than me. And then she left our public school system. I think she went to Bush. Bush was a private school in Seattle. It was Bush and Lakeside. If memory serves, I mean, it was a long, 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 long time ago. But when Roots came out, it was a huge deal because we talked about it a lot in school. And I didn't know much about the slave trade. I'm not going to lie. I think my friend Jerry Dow was the one black person in my grade. There was 3 different 5th grade classes. I mean, our school, Mercer Island it was Mercer Island, Washington, Island Park Elementary. You could probably count the black students on one hand. I mean, it was Gil Scott Heron white, whitey white white. My school was whitey white white, and Whitey was on the moon white. That's how white it was. It was Gil Scott Heron white, and Whitey's on the moon. So to have this kind of discourse and suddenly talking and again, 9 years old, but it was a big, 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 big deal that this was a gigantic miniseries, and it was appointment television. I'm not talking Red Wedding appointment television. I'm talking about every single, I felt that it was our duty. It was almost religious in nature to watch Roots. And I have to say, it was mesmerizing, horrifying. I mean, it was something. It didn't make me think of Robin DiAngelo's white fragility. It just made me think about how white people are fucking assholes. And I hadn't experienced, the only other experience I'd had with racism up until this point was when I first heard the N-word when someone was besmirching my first celebrity crush, Nichelle Nichols, Lieutenant Uhura, the communications officer on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And I've told that story before. And my dad had to explain to me what racism was. I'm like, how can you not like Lieutenant Uhura? She's like the most beautiful woman in the world. Like, what's your problem? I didn't get it. But so when Roots was on, it was gigantic. How gigantic? Well, I found an article that I'm going to share with you about Roots. And this kind of goes back to the idea that we have a pop culture memory of about 20 years. And after 20 years, we tend to forget. But I found this article now, and this article, wait a minute, what happened to, this is not the right article. Here we go. Where did my article go? Let my people, I don't know where it went. Here it is. Got it. No, I'm on the right one. This is from the New York Times, and this was published on May 27th, 2016. And the article was written by Matthew F. Delmont, and it's an op-ed piece, Why America Forgot About Roots. Nearly 40 years ago, Roots transfixed Americans, first as an overnight bestseller by Alex Haley, then as an ABC miniseries which drew 100 million viewers, still the record. It made the slave trade and black history inescapable parts of national popular culture and produced a unique moment when ordinary Americans talked about slavery in workplaces, bars, churches, and schools. This Memorial Day, the History, Lifetime, and A&E channels will start broadcasting a 4-night remake of the series. And while it's a good bet that it will also draw millions of viewers, it's an equally good bet that for almost all of them, the story of Kunta Kinte and his descendants is at best a dim cultural footnote. For all that Roots says about American slavery, its career as a cultural artifact speaks even more about how America talks about its own history. Roots was a hit because no one had ever read or seen anything like it. Popular memory of the antebellum South was still dominated by images of happy slaves and benevolent masters. The most watched TV program before Roots was Gone with the Wind, the 1939 Civil War epic that NBC broadcast over 2 nights in 1976. When Roots dethroned Gone with the Wind the next year, it wasn't just about ratings. It seemed to displace the power of racist fictions like Gone with the Wind and The Birth of a Nation to write history with lightning, to quote the phrase President Woodrow Wilson is said to have used to praise the latter D.W. Griffith's own Civil War epic. Haley wrote with an entire lightning storm. He tried to marshal the power of history on a mythic scale to advance black history. Haley's unapologetic commercial story asked readers and viewers across racial lines and national borders to identify with the sorrow, pain, and joy of enslaved black families in ways that were unusual in mass-market fiction and unprecedented on broadcast television. Its huge popularity made Roots a sort of template for representing slavery. It provided a baseline from which to create and appreciate more nuanced and challenging treatments of slavery, like Octavia Butler's Kindred, Toni Morrison's Beloved, and Charles Johnson's Middle Passage. Before Roots, The Middle Passage, the transatlantic journey to the New World endured by enslaved Africans, had rarely been depicted in literature and never on television. But Roots fell out of favor almost as quickly as it rose, in part because Haley's story started to unravel as soon as it was in print. He relied heavily on an editor to finish the book and later paid over $500,000 to settle a plagiarism suit. Other people were upset with the way ABC, Haley, and Doubleday, his publisher, seemed to be wringing money from the history of slavery. It was also hard for people to pin down Roots. Was it fact or fiction? Haley, who died in 1992, said it was a bit of both, a mix of archives, oral traditions, and imagination in a composite narrative he called faction. The television version complicated matters further, insisting that the production was based on a true story while billing the series as an ABC novel for television. If Roots was too fictional for most historians, its version of historical fiction was not literary enough for English departments. Roots is notably absent from the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, which runs to nearly 3,000 pages. The literary critic Arnold Rampersad described Roots as being so innocent of fictive ingenuity that it seldom surpasses the standards of most popular historical romances. He has a point. Over nearly 600 pages, Roots unfolds in a straight line from Kunta Kinte in the 1760s across 7 generations to Haley in the 1970s, with little tension or narrative sophistication. This commitment to continuity almost immediately put Haley out of step with how modern writers and artists approached slavery. But there is another reason Roots, as a cultural phenomenon, may have been forgotten. Americans choose to remember slavery at some moments and collectively forget about it at others. The 1970s saw an explosion in progressive black-centered television and culture, just as blacks were starting to make real socioeconomic gains as a result of the civil rights revolution of the 1960s. But by the 1980s, those gains had begun to slow and then reverse, while black representations on TV became fewer. In the minds of middle-brow America, Kunta Kinte was replaced by Bill Cosby. Roots has not been completely forgotten. Artists like Carl Walker and Edgar Arsenault have made reference to it, as have rappers like Missy Elliott and Kendrick Lamar. It inspired Henry Louis Gates' PBS genealogy shows, and yet today there are more books on recent critically lauded television shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, Breaking Bad, Mad Men than on Roots. It's fitting that Roots has been remade now, when the history of slavery is being debated with fresh urgency, including reparations discussions at Georgetown University, textbook controversies in Texas, battle over Confederate monuments and symbols, and disputes at Yale and other campuses over buildings named for slaveholders. And yet, the experience of Roots reminds us that while this moment of renewed attention to America's original sin is important, it is not guaranteed to last. The effects of slavery touch nearly every aspect of economic and social life, yet it remains one of the subjects Americans are most uncomfortable discussing. Given this, what Roots accomplished 4 decades ago is remarkable. It encouraged more people to engage seriously with the history of slavery than anything before or since. Roots introduced millions of people to African American history, And the book and television series made it clear that American history does not exist without black people. The 40 years since Roots have underscored how uncommon it is to still have black actors, culture, and history featured in a major television production, and how difficult it is to speak honestly about slavery. If we appreciate what made Roots a cultural phenomenon, we can better understand what it takes to make America reckon with slavery and its legacy. Matthew F. Delmont, who wrote this, is a professor of history at Arizona State University, and he's the author of the forthcoming book, Making Roots, A Nation Captivated. Now, the reason that I wanted to write or read this article, and you're going to see with my next articles, there's a theme here, is that at the time, my 9-year-old brain had never grappled with these stories. And to me, look, I knew what I was watching on television was fiction. However, based on a true story, a novel for television, I just assumed I understood what fiction was. But I also understood, I couldn't have named it, but I knew that the very best fiction was also the most truthful, even if it was made up. And for me, coming to grips with these issues and seeing the story of Kunta Kinte was a hugely transformative moment in my own time, my own upbringing, because it made me aware of a part of, like I said, Gil Scott-Heron, Whitey White, Whitey's on the moon, White. I didn't have any experience with black culture at all at that point in time. This was before Prince opened for the Rolling Stones and got booed off the stage. This was before I had seen early documentaries like Wild Style or Beat Street about New York, the genesis of New York hip hop and graffiti artists and all those things at the Seattle Film Festival in the early 80s. Although I believe I'd like 2 Jims and a Fred, I'd seen 3 the hard way. By the way, talk about Gordon Parks Jr., Superfly's director. This movie kicks ass. Thank you, Warner Archive, for releasing it last week. But I didn't know much about what was going on, but I'll tell you something. It broadened my horizons. And, I didn't have to read Robin DiAngelo and learn about white guilt. As a 9-year-old boy watching Roots. And, I watched most of it with my father, and we talked about it. And my dad, again, it was a conversation he had started with me a year or 2 before, and we were talking about race, and he was kind of explaining to me why I still had a hard time wrapping my head around why would somebody, when I watched Star Trek and Lieutenant Uhura was black, I didn't think to myself she was black. That was just the way Lieutenant Uhura looked. So I hadn't grasped until I probably saw Roots and understood what racism was. My father tried to explain it to me, but I didn't see it. I just heard words that didn't make much sense to me. But it was watching Roots that was a hugely influential show that helped me understand parts of the world that I certainly wasn't meant to understand, or at least at the time, or just didn't understand or couldn't understand because I didn't even live in a place that would even afford me the time to grapple with these issues unless I had seen them in that show. And so you never forgot it, and you never stopped thinking about what was going on in that show. But now, all this time later, does anybody remember? I don't know. Maybe they do. But the point is, as a 9-year-old watching that show, it's something that left an impression on me that never went away. And that's why pop culture can be important. And whether Alex Haley was writing a fictional story, he made half of it up, some of it was based in his own background, it didn't matter. He told a story that conveyed what he wanted to convey. And he made America, well, for maybe the first time, grapple with its original sin. On the television, on ABC, with 100 million people watching, which is something that always stayed with me. Now, the thing about that you have to remember is that there was only 3 networks, and cable hadn't even taken a hold. So in my town, in Seattle, we had 3 networks, and then we had, I think, only Channel 11. I'm not sure if we had Channel 13. Channel 11 was our independent station that had Star Trek on in syndication, and The Twilight Zone, and Outer Limits, and the Irwin Allen shows. I don't know if we had Channel 13 at the time. I'd have to look into that. But we're talking 5 channels in a major metropolitan area. That was it. So when something like Roots aired, everybody watched it. It was hugely important. Now, that wasn't the only thing that was something that, again, was hugely influential in my own life. And as I'm looking for the other thing that I wanted to read. Where did it go? The next thing that, here it is. I found it. This is the next thing that I'm going to read. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was, a lot of people don't know because I don't get into it. I don't address it that much, only because it's not really relevant to an entertainment station. But a lot of people know that I was raised Jewish. I was adopted. I was adopted. I was adopted into a Jewish family, and I lived with my parents since I was, in fact, a week old. And so I always knew I was adopted. My parents always told me I was adopted. But my mother wanted me to have a Jewish education. Both on my mom's side and my dad's side were Jewish. My dad's sister, my Aunt Barbara, was more Jewish than anyone in the family. Her side of the family was. And I had to go to Sunday school every Sunday to Temple D. Hirsch. And our family, my grandfather's side of the family, the Schoenfelds, they have a foundation, and they built a chapel at Temple D. Hirsch. And every year when I went to Temple, we would hear from actual Holocaust survivors. And of course, one of the things being Jewish that was always there, it's always present, is the idea of Israel. You know, when you're praying and when you're thinking about, part of Jewish life was to think about Jerusalem. I guess it's the same way when Muslims pray to Mecca. Jerusalem and Israel lived large in my religious upbringing. I had to learn Hebrew. I was bar mitzvahed. And then before my bar mitzvah, I started to have to go to Hebrew school on both. I was learning Hebrew. I was going to Sunday school on Sunday, and then I had Tuesday night religion school as well. And I was really interested. I liked Jewish history because it was so tumultuous and horrific, which by that time it really appealed to me. And it was really interesting learning about Jewish history and how what had gone on. Like, for instance, and I was talking about this earlier this week or a couple days ago, like in the 1880s, for instance, Jews started migrating. Judea and Samaria was very sparsely populated. There weren't a whole lot of people there. There were Jews, there were Arabs, there were Christians, but there weren't a lot of people there. It was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and part of the reason for that was there were lowlands, swamplands near the coast that were malarial-ridden. You know, malaria was a huge problem there. And what was really interesting in the 1880s, a lot of Arabs, Jews, people started to buy the land. And one of the things that was interesting as far as Jews were concerned is there was an effort by Jews who bought land, and they got rid of malaria. They were draining the swamps, and they got rid of the problem of malaria. And once they eradicated that problem, once the Jewish, it was the Jews who did this with land that they bought, and then they went and there was not a lot going on. Remember, the Ottoman Empire controlled the land at this time, but the Jews got rid of the malaria. They got rid of the mosquitoes. And once they did that, more Arabs could come in, more people could come in, and the population started to explode. And then, of course, the difficulties between the Arabs and the Jews, which have happened for thousands, 1,400 years, whatever, happened. So there were people back then, in the 1880s, and the population, the problems began there. Actually, they go back a lot further, thousands of years, but in that particular part of the world, there was, of course, Palestine. The Romans renamed the land and all that, but it certainly was not what it is now or what it was after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and after World War I, but I'm not going to get into that. But the interesting thing was I thought that was interesting. And the fact that the Jews would buy the land and then they were able to eradicate malaria because they got rid of the swamps. I thought that was really, really cool. And the thing that, when I was growing up, the thing that that I learned most, and the reason I liked being Jewish is because in my family and going to school, it was always emphasized, education was emphasized, family, education, industry, learning, all of those things. You had to be a better person. You had to be a seeker. You had to learn. You had to study. It was very academic. You studied this Torah. You studied scripture. You learned what you could. You had to be industrious. You had to be a self-starter in a way. And that was sort of ingrained in me, and I was already interested in the world anyway. But one of the things about being Jewish that was instilled in me is if you put your mind to it, you can pretty much accomplish whatever you want. It's not going to be easy, and you might fail. But if you want to go out and do something, you can. No one ever told me, yeah, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or don't, no. It was always about, well, if you put your mind to it, you can learn enough, you can go out there, you can be excellent, and that was what my experience as a little kid was like going to school. And of course, the flip side of that was the persecution the Jews suffered for our entire history. And when I started going to Sunday school, it was in the 1970s, and we were not very far away, really, from the Holocaust. And before that, something big that I remembered when I was a kid, the director, the great Otto Preminger, had made a film version of Leon Uris's book, Exodus. And Exodus was made into a movie that came out in 1960 starring Paul Newman. And Paul Newman was a guy who was going to take Jews from Cyprus to Israel on a boat. I believe the boat was called the Exodus, or the Exodus. And this was a big deal. Barbra Streisand and Exodus were like really big. Because, hey, Exodus was a Jewish-themed movie. And I ended up reading the book, Exodus. And to be honest, it's kind of a racist book. It wasn't really nice to the Arabs, and it wasn't nice to Christians. At least that's how I remembered it. It was pretty racist. I mean, it's not really race. It's more religionist, classist. It was not, it certainly, it was definitely came down on the side of the Jews. But it was, it was all a part of all of that. And of course, Israel, very important. And then the 6-Day War, again, there were raid on Entebbe, Munich had happened, all of this stuff. So the persecution that Jews suffered was also a big deal. And it had gone on for a long time. So in addition to learning how to be industrious and learning how to be inquisitive, you also had to deal with the persecution you were going to feel. And it was very apparent to me, while I didn't understand racism because of the color of people's skin, I knew that a lot of people hated Jews. And I didn't look Jewish, and I didn't volunteer that information. And I heard a lot of anti-Semitic shit when I was growing up. I really did. And the first time I ever really took a stand, there was me and Jason Levin. And Jason Levin, we're in Cub Scouts. And over the holidays, we had to go sing Christmas carols at like the local old folks home. And I had said, and maybe Jason and I said it together, we asked if we could sing some Hanukkah songs. And they let us do it. Because I was like, this is kind of bullshit. I don't mind singing Christmas songs. And to be fair, I love Christmas. But it's that kind of a thing. But because the way I looked, I did find out when I finally met my biological mother when I was 29. She's Jewish. But anyway, because then people were like, you're not really Jewish. My whole life I had to hear that. I heard it from Jews. You're not really Jewish. You adopted. People call me a Nazi infiltrator. I heard a lot of shit from other Jews and from people. I would just hear anti-Semitic shit. The stuff I heard was so crazy. I was like, where did all of that come from? But just like Roots in 1977, something happened, I think a year later. there was a TV miniseries called Holocaust. And it was perhaps not the big cultural deal. I certainly don't remember our school, elementary school, Highland Park, making a big deal about Holocaust. It was more something that I don't think we were encouraged to watch. But I watched it, and James Woods starred in it. Meryl Streep starred in it. It was a big, 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 big deal. And, for a young Jewish kid, it's like, whoo, wow, we're going to watch. I mean, I met Holocaust survivors every year. So to watch this, and to learn about something, it's one thing to read when you're a kid. But one of the things that I've always loved about movies and television is you can watch it, you can see depictions of these things, and rightly or wrongly, it makes them far more real and visceral. And when this was on, I mean, they didn't cut to the chase. They cut to it was just called Holocaust. Now, here's another interesting article I found that I wanted to read. And I'll tell you, Holocaust was a harrowing experience to watch. But I thought I would read this article about Holocaust, the TV miniseries. And this comes to us from the BBC. Damien McGuinness wrote this article on January 29th. It was published January 29th, 2019. The title is Holocaust: How a U.S. Television Series Changed Germany. It was a big-budget American TV starring Meryl Streep, and in 1979, the miniseries Holocaust transformed how Germans saw their own history. It brought the horrors of Nazi crimes into people's living rooms and turned the word Holocaust into a commonly used term in the German language. This month, the drama has been shown again on German TV, and it is as relevant as ever. A third of West Germany's population, some 20 million people, watched at least some of the four-part miniseries in 1979. Holocaust tells the story of a fictional Jewish family, Josef Weiss, a successful Berlin doctor, and his wife and children, charting their tragic journey from bourgeois affluence to the gas chambers. A parallel story focuses on Erich Dorf, an unemployed lawyer who is initially apolitical but gets a job with Hitler's SS and becomes part of the Nazi killing machine. The series sparked a national debate. Surveys show that 86% of viewers discuss the Holocaust with friends and family after watching the program. 10,000 Germans called the broadcaster WDR afterwards, many in tears, to express their shock and shame. In some cases, former soldiers got in touch to confirm the details of Nazi crimes. There's beautiful young Meryl Streep. She played a Christian woman, Inga, married to one of the Weiss sons. This was the first time that a major mainstream drama had portrayed the lives of Hitler's victims. There's a theme here. Until then, serious documentaries had dealt with facts and figures, and during the 1960s, the debate focused primarily on perpetrators, sparked in part by the Auschwitz trials held in Frankfurt between 1963 and 1965. Survivors came to the Auschwitz trials, and journalists didn't even interview them. No one cared about the victims. That changed with the TV series Holocaust, said historian Professor Frank Bosch. He has written a book, and I can't pronounce this, Dieterwood, Zeitenwende, in 1979, about key events of 1979 that transformed the world. He believes this TV drama is one of them, alongside the Iranian Revolution, the Iranian Revolution and the election of Margaret Thatcher. And then you have different articles. 1 in 20 denies the Holocaust took place. The Holocaust miniseries tells emotional, personal stories of everyday people, easy for viewers to identify with and accessible to mainstream society. Unusually, perpetrators are not demonized as freakishly diabolical sadists, but appear as ordinary Germans, cogs in the Nazi machine, who contributed to the Holocaust through small, everyday acts of cruelty or cowardice. Here you see James Woods, and he played Jewish artist Carl Weiss, and he's married to Meryl Streep. The series was controversial and almost never came to Germany. It was made by the American TV station NBC, well, it wasn't a station, but that trivialized the Shoah, or Holocaust. Left-wingers accused U.S. broadcasters of cynically exploiting Nazi crimes for the sake of TV ratings. Right-wing nationalists complained that German war victims were being forgotten. Neo-Nazis even bombed 2 television transmitters in an attempt to stop the broadcast in Germany. This transformed how Germany deals with its Nazi past. Initially, some German officials feared the series would spark anti-German sentiment abroad, says Professor Bosch, but the national soul-searching provoked by the drama has led to respect for how Germany faces up to its past crimes. A few months after the series was broadcast, Germany scrapped the statute of limitations for murder to enable Nazis to be tried for their participation in the Holocaust, and the nationwide debate led to a thirst for more knowledge. During the 1980s, schools demanded more teaching material. German historians started focusing more on the Holocaust, and concentration camps opened the first major exhibitions and memorials. Now, as the miniseries comes to an end on TV, Germany has been reassessing how the drama changed the country 40 years ago. Remembrance of the Holocaust and the words "never again" have become key principles of modern Germany's political identity. But the far-right Alternative for Germany, the AfD, says Germans should now move on and draw a line under that culture of commemoration. Last year, AfD leader Alexander Guland described Nazi rule as a mere bird droppings in over 1,000 years of successful German history. And less than half of German 14 to 16-year-olds know what Auschwitz was, according to a survey by the Korver Foundation. 40 years after the Holocaust was first broadcast in Germany, accessible dramas that highlight Nazi crimes are still needed. Today, the discourse behind both Black history and Jewish history are, let's just say, not as robust as they seemed to be when I was a kid. When I was a kid, you could have discussions. When I was a kid, I met people who had been interred in concentration camps. The Nazis kept amazing records because, remember, what they thought they were doing, or what they were doing, they thought of as being correct. They were proud of what they did. And nowadays, we live in a world where half the online discourse is from people that don't believe it even happened. And I think, in a way, it's because we no longer have these kinds of events. People didn't grow up seeing Roots. They didn't grow up, or when they did, it wasn't the kind of, the Holocaust miniseries, it wasn't the Holocaust, it's just called Holocaust. That miniseries, as this article points out, changed Germany forever. Because at the time, there was no depictions of the Holocaust on our media, the same way that there was no depictions of the African slave trade on television. And it was back in the 1970s that, people thought, and the powers that be at the networks felt, that we were a mature enough society that we could watch a miniseries about the African slave trade and a miniseries a few years later that dealt with the Holocaust. When was the last time you felt that the powers that be, say at Disney or Warner Brothers or ABC or NBC, treated you like that? Well, that was the world I came out of. That was the world where that's why movies meant so much to me. That's why I learned so much from seeing these shows. Listen, I went from the Holocaust to seeing The Winds of War, which is after Shogun, the original 1980 Shogun with Richard Chamberlain. I went right from Roots. I never watched Rich Man, Poor Man, and I didn't watch The Thornbirds until later. But Roots, Holocaust, Shogun, and The Winds of War irrevocably changed me growing up. These were entertainments that were on television that were historical epics that really had a profound effect on me. And they changed the way I thought about the world. Now, you can be cynical and say, oh, Rob, they're just TV shows. They weren't just TV shows. And not only that, the nation, America, collectively watched these things together. Kids, friends of mine talked about it. I heard parents talking about it. My parents talked about it. I talked about it with my grandparents. It was a discussion that went on, and there were enough history books. You could delve right into it, and I feel that today, the world of today, and especially judging by the rise of social media and what it's done to say the truth. Now you could say, Rob, you're not suggesting that you got some kind of truth from a TV show. No, I'm not. But what it did do, it made me, actually, the Winds of War made me read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which that I still have. It's one of the biggest books I've ever read. Fascinating. One day I want to own one of Winston Churchill's 5 volumes. I want to own the first edition of Winston Churchill's 5 volumes of about World War II. Now we have people trying to convince the world that Winston Churchill was evil. The things that I hear people say today are a lot of what I hear about the discourse. It seems to me that people really don't know. They've only experienced a certain kind of thing. When you're in your own bubble and you're only getting things back at you that you want to hear, you're not grappling with, as I always suggest people do, try and see both sides. Look into history. There's nothing more fascinating than human history. It's more compelling. It's more exciting. It's more dangerous. It's more eye-opening than most of the fiction you'll read. But it makes me sad that I feel that we have a lot of young people that are growing up. They're certainly not learning about this stuff in school, not the way we did. They're not learning about it with religious studies the way I did. They're not watching multi-night miniseries that become captivating. I mean, I was 13 when I saw Shogun. One of the most interesting things about it was that it wasn't subtitled. So you were put in the position of John Blackthorne where you had to figure out what the Japanese were saying. And, I'd already liked martial arts movies, and I especially like samurai movies. And it was amazing to see Shogun. I knew who Toshiro Mifune was. It was amazing. But nowadays, and I was 13, and I was completely, it wasn't because I was some special kid. It was just the fact that I love stories, and I loved stories well told. And when you watch Shogun, I was locked in. What happens? It starts with a storm at sea. The ship gets washed into a harbor. One of the first things you see on national television was a dude getting his head chopped off. I'm like, I'm so in on TV. It was like seeing, actually, you know what I forgot? My other favorite miniseries. I keep forgetting because I'm thinking network television. I, Claudius, the BBC's I, Claudius. Boobs on TV. Ba-boom. It was great. But anyway, these were important things. These shaped me as a kid. It wasn't Marvel, it wasn't Star Wars, although Star Wars came out the same year as Roots. But I watched these things. And so, I heard something really interesting today about the war, what's going on in Gaza. There's been a lot of talk about apartheid. Israel does not have an apartheid government. I've been there. But it was really interesting. The talk of genocide. When you start delving into what happened, and remember, it wasn't just 6 million Jews that were killed in the Holocaust. It was 6 million other people. And they would have eventually gotten around to everybody. And how many Russians lost their lives because of German aggression. In Gaza, about 70% of the buildings and the infrastructure are either damaged or completely destroyed. 70%. 70% of the population hasn't been destroyed. The buildings have. You'd think if 70% of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, and they have, you would assume, because people are living on top of each other in Gaza, families, we didn't lose 70% of the population. Is that a genocide? Where those people, were they not in the buildings? And if they weren't in the buildings, why weren't they? Because they were warned to leave. The war in Gaza, whatever you might think of it, it's horrible. All the needless death that's happened in Gaza, it's almost unfathomable to contemplate. But the fact is, there is not a genocide happening in Gaza. And any cursory glance at what went on in, say, Rwanda, what went on in Syria, what went on in Yemen, what went on in Libya, and especially back to what went on in Germany, the industrialized extermination of millions of people. That's what real genocide looks like. But today, people trivialize that word and throw it around like they know what it means. War is hell, and it shouldn't be wished on anybody. But there's a difference between war and genocide. And that's just something that I think if people would know more and delve into history, learning more about real history and what's really going on is always worthwhile. It's always worthwhile. Anyway, let's see what you are saying. Let's see. Let's find out if anyone is saying, oh, not many people. Thomas Logan says, don't forget my letter, Bobby. The MCU is in flux. It's for a different day. Denzel was great in Glory. Are you a fan? I love Glory. Who doesn't love Glory? I think Glory is fantastic. Absolutely love it. I love Glory. It's a great movie. Marco Esquindola says, people today are very uninformed, and it is a huge problem. Yeah, I totally agree. Let me just make sure. I'm going to just check out one more place here. I want to make sure I don't miss anybody. Let's see. I don't think I have missed anybody. Let me just check. By the way, these articles that I've read are in the description, right by the tip link. Okay. I am caught up. So, the trifecta of things that I learned about when I was a kid. So you're the black experience, slavery, the Holocaust. The other thing that was hard to escape when I was a child was Vietnam. And when I started to really go to the movies a lot, the Vietnam War loomed large in the minds of Americans because it had just happened. Many people knew people that served in the war. And of course, between the civil rights movement and the protests against the Vietnam War, it really did a number on the U.S. And I was seeing movies. My mom took me to see The Deer Hunter, not knowing what it was about. She knew it was tangentially about the Vietnam War, but really had no idea. And by the time it got down to Christopher Walken and Robert De Niro playing Russian roulette in a Vietnamese prison, which, by the way, again, fictional, and watching people shoot themselves in the head. Thank you, Mom. That was incredible. Not necessarily in a good way, but I'd never seen anything like it. She also took me to see a movie called Coming Home with Jane Fonda, which was incredibly sexually explicit at the time. So, and I was already a horny kid. But it's really interesting. The Vietnam War dominated. And again, I was a kid. I grew up. I was born in the midst of it. I was born in the summer of love. And Vietnam was omnipresent in my childhood. I heard about it on TV, Vietnam and Watergate and the Apollo missions. I mean, that's what I remember from television when I was a kid. I remember as a kid seeing body bags on the news. I remember all of that. But it was the movies then, and if people remember, I mean, we started seeing Apocalypse Now, one of my favorite movies of all time, 1979. Vietnam movies were, when was De Palma's Casualties of War? We had at least a decade. And whether it was John Rambo coming back from Vietnam, whether it was Gene Hackman going back to Vietnam in Uncommon Valor to rescue our POWs, the Vietnam War dominated American pop culture for 10 years, 15 years after the end of the actual war itself. So here's another article that I would like to read called Someday This War is Going to End. The Vietnam Wars Cinematic History, Cinematic Legacy. And this is by Crystal Gallian. I think it's Gallian. And I don't know if this is dated. I don't see a date on it, but it's from the U.S. history scene. And again, I thought it would be interesting to share. Ever think you would get a history lesson from Rambo? Clues to our nation's history emerge from the unlikeliest of places, and in recent decades, historians have come to look to films for insight into the social, cultural, and political realities of the past. Cinema is among the most powerful vehicles for expressing ideological or socio-political commentary. So, all of you people that say, Rob, why don't you stick to talking about movies? Well, cinema is among the most powerful vehicles for expressing ideological and socio-political commentary. So, to be an avid film watcher and a cineast is to be learning about politics all the time. And a well-made film can have a visceral and long-lasting resonance on its viewers, shaping opinions in a forceful way. D.W. Griffith, the director of one of Hollywood's first epic historical films, Birth of a Nation, now canceled, once predicted that movies, as the newest and most powerful form of dramatic expression, would eventually be the source of most people's historical knowledge. After viewing Griffith's epic, President Woodrow Wilson reportedly remarked that the film was like writing history with lightning. For better or for worse, many people's perceptions of historical events and periods are shaped by the movies they watch. And society's view of the past and the present can be powerfully affected by film. Historical films, whether their subject matter is ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, or World War II, can be an especially fruitful area of study for historians, not only for information on the eras depicted, but for clues into the era in which they were produced. This historical interpretation of films pays particular attention to presentism, defined as using a depiction of the past to comment on the present. One of the most often cited examples of cinematic presentism is Stanley Kubrick's 1960 film Spartacus. When Hollywood was suspected of straying from the official line during the Cold War, actors, directors, and screenwriters were among the primary targets of the communist witch hunt by the House of Un-American Activities Committee and separately by Senator Joseph McCarthy. Hollywood as a target of politicians. Say it ain't so, Joe. Screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, who had been blacklisted from working in Hollywood because of suspected communist affiliations, wrote Spartacus. I think he wrote... Did he write Exodus too? He might have. I forget. Who had been blacklisted from working in Hollywood because of suspected communist affiliations, wrote Spartacus, the story of a slave uprising in ancient Rome. If the employment of Trumbo wasn't enough to protest the communist witch hunt of the day, the climactic scene of the movie presents dozens of slaves claiming to be Spartacus. The famous "I am Spartacus" line was an expression of solidarity with their rebellious leader. Viewers at the time and historians since have interpreted the scene as criticism of McCarthyism and a plea for solidarity against persecution. Such presentism is also apparent in the dozens of films made about the Vietnam War, which occurred from 1959 to 1975. Though few filmmakers touched on the conflict during the war itself, a slew of films commenting on Vietnam appeared in the late 70s and 1980s, all arguably advancing political and ideological agendas relevant to their present. As film studies scholar and former American Studies professor of the University of Ulster, Michael Klein, has written, Hollywood adopted Vietnam as a setting within which ideological constructs are explored and contested. Unlike the Hollywood Western or World War II film, which often followed set tropes of heroes, sunsets, celebrations of brotherhood, and uncomplicated plots of good versus evil, the cinematic treatment of Vietnam, perhaps the most traumatic and contested historical memory in recent American history, has been a much more complex, diverse, and anxiety-ridden endeavor. A look at the history of the production and reception of Vietnam films reveals how the nation processed a military trauma. The roots of the Vietnam War lie in World War II, when Japan occupied the small southeastern country as part of an aggressive campaign of territorial expansion, displacing the colonial French authority that had ruled the region since the late 19th century. A communist national independence movement called the Viet Minh, led by Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, challenged Japanese occupation. After Japan admitted defeat at the end of World War II in 1945 and France reoccupied the region, the Viet Minh continued its campaign against French colonialists, capturing the city of Hanoi and declaring Vietnam an independent country. The French, refusing to recognize independence, fought against Ho Chi Minh's forces until 1954, when the warring parties agreed to a peace settlement dividing the country into two: a communist North Vietnam under the rule of Ho Chi Minh, and a South Vietnam led by a French-backed emperor. The U.S., which had supported French forces financially and through very limited covert military assistance, worried that all of Vietnam would fall under communist rule, a turn of events which, under the domino theory, a concept first advanced by President Dwight Eisenhower, which posited that surrounding countries would follow Vietnam's lead by falling to communism and Soviet influence. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy sent military advisors to South Vietnam. The conflict continued to escalate over the next few years as subsequent presidents sent more and more forces into the country. Unused to guerrilla tactics, American troops struggled to gain leverage over communist forces who were not easily identifiable and at times hid among the very villagers the U.S. was supposedly liberating. The result was a confused, chaotic war marked by transient victories and ever-rising body counts. Throughout the war, 2.6 million American forces served in Vietnam, of which 58,000 were killed and more than 300,000 were wounded. As the war escalated, a large and visible anti-war movement developed in the U.S. as public opinion divided bitterly over the conflict. The Vietnam War was, that time, the longest military conflict in U.S. history, and America's defeat came as a shock to national pride. The most powerful military in the world had lost to an agrarian population with less advanced technology and fewer numbers. Incidents such as the infamous 1968 My Lai massacre shattered the myth that American troops were capable of upholding superior standards of dignity and humanitarianism during wartime. Many anti-war Americans lost faith in their political leaders, while those who had supported the war accused peace protesters of undermining the war effort. More than anything, the idea that the United States was the strongest superpower was now in doubt. As Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger said years after the war, the United States has lost its preeminence. Its power, which earlier was indisputable, is now very much disputable. During the war itself, Hollywood largely shied away from producing films that directly addressed Vietnam. Films preceding and during the first years of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, like Chinagate in 1957, framed the conflict as an opportunity for American underdogs to defeat evil communists. In 1965, the Pentagon produced Why Vietnam?, which, in the tradition of similar film series produced during World War II, explained the conflict to the public through fairly simplistic pro-military propaganda. Why Vietnam framed the war as a defensive one, protecting U.S. interests and liberating oppressed Vietnamese from aggressive communists. While Why Vietnam attempted to package the war in patriotism, more critical documentary makers released films like Inside North Vietnam from 1968 and Hearts and Minds in 1974, which portrayed the human cost of the war. Furthermore, for the first time in history, television viewers could see snippets of the war on the evening news, alongside images of massive peace protests, which grew to include hundreds of thousands of protesters as the war escalated through the 1960s. The only fictional film released during the war was John Wayne's The Green Berets from 1968, a film loosely based on a best-selling novel of the same title. Produced with financial assistance from the Pentagon, the film achieved commercial success but was recognized by more skeptical viewers as blatant pro-war propaganda, which celebrated U.S. soldiers as uncomplicated heroes making sacrifices for an unquestionably noble cause. The Green Berets liberally borrowed from Hollywood westerns, complete with Indian-like war whoops from the Vietnamese. As American film scholars Albert Oster and Leonard Quart have written, the film essentially had John Wayne transform Vietnam into a pop, patriotic, right-wing version of Cowboys and Indians. Green Berets also borrowed heavily from the cinematographic tropes of World War II films, applying them to conflict that was arguably far more morally ambiguous and complex. During World War II, the U.S. government had enlisted Hollywood in the war effort, and movie studios cranked out films portraying American soldiers as brave and willing frontmen in a relatively uncomplicated battle against good and evil and freedom and fascism. But the well-recognized and comfortable plots and characters of the World War II film seemed to no longer apply. The divisiveness and occasional absurdity of Vietnam called for a more complex cinematic treatment. It was fitting that 2 World War II films released during the Vietnam War, Catch-22, based on Joseph Heller's darkly satirical novel of the same name, and a great movie if you haven't seen it, and Slaughterhouse-5, another great science fiction film, based on Kurt Vonnegut's similarly dark science fiction work, viewed the conflict through a far more cynical and absurdist lens that had previous cinematic treatments of World War II. So, as you can see, because of the craziness that happened to the American psyche as a result of losing Vietnam and hardly being anything like World War II, truly a guerrilla war, and we didn't really have what was our goal in Vietnam. And it really, remember, it was a police action. So it was a crazy time. But as this article points out, what ended up happening is that after the war, when we started getting movies like The Deer Hunter, like Coming Home, and then the Vietnam era movies that, because we saw things like, I would say that George Romero's original Night of the Living Dead, of course, was a Vietnam era horror film. Vietnam, the Vietnam War, what happened, the civil rights movement, all of that changed the entire tenor and pallor of American pop culture. And horror films, I mean, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead, I think these are movies that only could have been made in a post-Vietnam environment, even though Night of the Living Dead was made during Vietnam. But it was definitely informed by seeing our troops coming home in body bags on the nightly news. But when you got out of Vietnam, like this article points out, you know, the movie Apocalypse Now is obviously, as many people know, it is a retelling of Hearts of Darkness, the story Hearts of Darkness, and it uses the Vietnam War as a location. And you know, Coppola famously said this was the Vietnam War. Making that movie in the Philippines was for it was Vietnam for Coppola. I wouldn't go necessarily that far, but it definitely was something that was when you would go see these movies. And again, I had begun my cinematic journey when I really started going to movies in the late 70s, actually the mid 70s, late 70s, and 80s, when I became a voracious, I mean, I saw 2 or 3 movies a week. And that wasn't even including cable and home video. And I was working in what was considered the second video store in the United States, actually, in Seattle. Video Space, founded by VSDA founder Weston Nishimura. But it was an interesting time, and to see the kinds of, like, Full Metal Jacket, you know, Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, and I was a huge Kubrick fan by the time that movie came out, 87? Seeing how Vietnam, the dehumanization of becoming a Marine, and what went on in Vietnam, and the fact that, you know, it didn't matter how badass you were going to get taken out by a female sniper in a building. What were you going to do about it? And, I mean, you could use Vietnam as a storytelling vehicle and tell whatever story you wanted to tell. You're all going to get to see, because you probably haven't seen it, John Woo's Bullet in the Head, which is another really interesting take on Southeast Asia, which I can't wait for everybody to see. God bless the Golden Princess Library being brought to us by Shout Factory. You guys better do a fucking good job. That's all I can say. But overall, the point of all of these things, Vietnam, slavery, Holocaust, is that my experience growing up and watching all of these things, a lot of it was shaped by actual historical accounts. And I was watching movies and TV shows like Roots, like Holocaust, like Shogun, like The Winds of War. These were important to me, and I was watching them right alongside Star Wars, Superman the movie, Logan's Run, Alien, Dawn of the Dead, Phantasm, whatever it was I was loving, Jaws. I was watching these other things concurrently because they were there and because they were being made, because people would watch them. 100 million views on Roots at the time, the biggest. And then it said in this BBC article, which I don't know if it's true or not, 120 million Americans watched Holocaust. And at the time, in 78, 79, 120 million people was like, what, half the adult population of the U.S., probably even more than that. These were the things that I grew up watching. Now, I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody or that that time was a better time. I'm just saying that it was understood that these kinds of entertainments, Warner Brothers released The Killing Fields. It was nominated for Best Picture. I saw it when I was the same year I graduated in high school in 1985. I thought that was going to win Best Picture until I saw Amadeus, when I then realized Amadeus was going to win because it was an even better movie. But The Killing Fields was hugely impactful for me. And it was about one man's journey, Hang Nor, Dr. Nor, crossing Cambodia, and after being left behind by the Americans that he was serving. I can imagine someone's going to make a Killing Fields about Afghans that we left behind when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. We'll get that Killing Fields. But these were big budget Hollywood movies that big studios were releasing. We don't have anything like that anymore. And I think that with the rise of social media, part of what we're seeing in terms of activism, identity politics, is because there is no sense. Like, look, it was much more palatable to watch a miniseries like Roots or Holocaust or Shogun or Winds of War, or let's face it, The Thornbirds or Rich Man, Poor Man. It was much more palatable to watch these big, grand entertainments than it was to pick up a book and read it. Well, now, without these kinds of entertainments, although you can go get them and watch them if you want, I have Holocaust, Roots, Winds of War, and War and Remembrance. I have them on. I can watch them all. But the point is, our pop culture doesn't have any of this anymore. Especially like when I was seeing these things as a hugely impressionable young person, trying to figure out who I was as I was entering puberty. The fact that I was bar mitzvahed when I was 13, and then the next week, actually my bar mitzvah and The Empire Strikes Back, same week. That was a big fucking week back in 1980. And to have all this stuff happen at the same time or concurrently, I think it was a great way to grow up. And it was a great way. I mean, of course, I was always interested in this material anyway, but it truly was a great way to grow up, being exposed to all of these ideas, having to grapple with them. What did they mean? And you would be like, okay, I went and saw Apocalypse Now, and then I went and saw Alien. Was there any connection? I have no idea. There might have been. But the fact was, my brain was racing a mile a minute because the pop culture that I was exposing myself to was full of very relevant, whether it was politics, it was truly great stuff. And we don't have that now. And, with our higher education, wow, they are really trying. I wonder if somebody's trying to cut off my stream. I've been watching it for the last 5 minutes. Someone said if someone's reporting me, did someone not like my subject matter tonight? I don't know. But it's interesting that these streams are, am I being attacked? Is this a deny? Are people trying to deny you, my viewers, of my service? But either way, I really feel that our pop culture, I mean, I did an article about how pop culture is in the toilet anyway, but part of our pop culture used to be really important, issue-driven movies that were as much a part of the landscape as anything. They existed right next to, I mean, when Brian De Palma made Casualties of War, fucking Michael J. Fox was in that shit with Sean Penn, and it was brutal. I mean, we don't have anything like that anymore. It's all become escapism. I'm not saying like, sure, Roman Polanski made The Pianist, and we still get movies like that. And you might think, do I have another article to read? Well, it's funny that you ask, because I do. I have a fourth article to read. But first of all, let me see if anyone is still here. Who's with me? Are you like Luke? I'm with you too. And by the way, I've got stuff to I've got stuff. I still have stuff to show. So don't think that I'm done. So, Paul Bernardo. Paul Bernardo's here. Hi, Rob. Are you showing the birthday box on this show? Yes, I am. I had to have some mirth for the end of this show, didn't I? Dieter Bastian. I love that my own Dieter Bastian, I call him my own, I'm his too, is sending me euros. Dieter Bastian says, what Rob is referring to is when it comes to an older hit show is called Strabenfeuer. I can't even pronounce that. In German means a street cleaner. And Zettenwende, I don't even know, is a turning point. Well, that's good to know. I like that, Dieter. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. But I got one more article to read. To round this one out. And as you might wonder, this one is also about Holocaust movies. Hey, I started with slavery and then the Holocaust, and now I will end with the Holocaust. This article comes to us. Actually, let me bring it to you. Hang on. This article comes to us from the New York Times, and it's written by A.O. Scott, the great A.O. Scott, and it was written on November 21st, 2008. Why so many Holocaust films now, and for whose benefit? So this article comes to us, what is that, 17 years ago? This holiday season, the multiplexes, the art houses, and the glossy for your consideration ads in publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter will be overrun with Nazis. A minor incursion of this sort is an annual Oscar season tradition, but 2008 offers an abundance of peaked caps and riding breeches, lightning bolt collar pins, and swastika armbands as an unusually large cadre of prominent actors assumes the burden of embodying the most profound and consequential evil of the recent past. The near simultaneous appearance of all these movies is to some degree a coincidence, but it throws into relief the curious fact that early 21st century culture in Europe and America, on screen and in books, is intensely, perhaps morbidly preoccupied with the great political trauma of the mid-20th century. The number of Holocaust-related memoirs, novels, documentaries, and feature films in the past decade or so seems to defy quantification, and their proliferation raises some uncomfortable questions. Why are there so many? Why now? And more queasily, could there be too many? David Thewlis, playing a death camp commandant in The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, will be joined by Willem Dafoe, who takes on a similar role in Adam Resurrected, Paul Schrader's new film. In The Reader, directed by Stephen Daldry and based on Bernard Schlink's best-selling novel of the same name, Kate Winslet plays a former concentration camp guard tried for war crimes. Tom Cruise, the star of Bryan Singer's Valkyrie, wears the uniform of the Third Reich through his character, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, was not a true-believing Nazi, but rather a patriotic German military officer involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. And, of course, there will be plenty of room on screen for the victims and survivors of Hitler's regime. Adam, the title character in Adam Resurrected, is a Berlin nightclub performer played by Jeff Goldblum who finds himself, after enduring the camps, confined to an Israeli asylum. And in Edward Zwick's Defiance, Daniel Craig plays Tuvia Belsky, the real-life leader of a group of Jewish partisans who fought the Germans in the forest of Belarus. Meanwhile, the wave of European cinema dealing with Nazism and the Holocaust, most prominently represented on American screens in recent years by The Counterfeiters, which won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film back in February, and earlier aspirants like Downfall and Black Book, continued this autumn with the U.S. releases of A Secret and One Day You'll Understand, two quiet, powerful French-language films exploring themes of memory and its suppression. The moral imperatives imposed by the slaughter of European Jews are never again and never forget, which I mean logically that the story of the Holocaust must be repeated again and again and again. But the sheer scale of the atrocity, the 6 million extinguished lives and the millions more that were indelibly scarred, damaged, and disrupted, suggests that the research, documentation, and imaginative reconstruction, the building of memorials and museums, the writing of books and scripts, no matter how scrupulous and exhaustive, will necessarily be partial, inadequate, and belated. And this tragic foreknowledge of insufficiency, which might be inhibiting, turns out, on the contrary, to spur the creation of more and more material. Shortly after, the German critic T.W. Adorno declared that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, this observation has frequently been interpreted aphoristically as a fiat of silence, a prohibition against the use of the ordinary tools of culture to address the extraordinary, unassailable fact of genocide. But those tools are what we have to work with. The perception that this catastrophe overwhelms conventional aesthetic strategies and traditions has led to the creation of a remarkable range of formerly innovative work, including the lyric poetry of Paul Celan, the early prose works of Elie Wiesel, Claude Lanzmann's epic documentary Shoah, Art Spiegelman's Maus, and Peter Eisenman's Berlin Memorial to the Jewish victims of Nazism. To describe these as masterpieces is not especially controversial, but it is also, as Adorno perhaps anticipated, somehow unseemly. If the Holocaust can inspire a great work of art, then it can also incubate the ambition to achieve such greatness and thus open itself up, like everything else, to exploitation, pretense, and vulgarity. Worse, the aura that still surrounds this topic, the sense that it must be treated with a special measure of tact and awe, can be appropriated by clumsy, sentimental, and meretricious films or books. Thus, the immodest indecency of a movie like Roberto Benigni's Oscar-winning Life is Beautiful was, during its initial period of triumph, deflected onto those with the temerity to criticize it. And a similar defense is invoked explicitly or implicitly, so routinely that it calls forth cynicism. Why do opportunistic, clever young novelists gravitate toward magical, realist depictions of the decidedly unmagical reality of the Shoah? For the same reason that actors preen and leer in jackboots and epaulets, or for the same reason that filmmakers commission concrete barracks and instruct their cinematographers to filter out bright, saturated colors. To win prizes, of course. Winslet said as much on an episode of Extras. I've noticed that if you do a film about the Holocaust, you're guaranteed an Oscar. She was joking, of course, though her appearance in The Reader suggests that the joke is funny because it's often true. Why else do you suppose all the movies listed at the beginning of this article, including The Reader, are coming out in November and December? It's not because Hanukkah is coming. The television miniseries Holocaust is nobody's idea of a masterpiece, but its broadcast in 1979 on West German state television was a decisive event in the nation's reckoning with its culpability. It is estimated that more than half of the adult German population watched the series. Subsequently, according to the historian Tony Jute, Germans would be among the best-informed Europeans on the subject of the Shoah and at the forefront of all efforts to maintain public awareness of their country's singular crime. The French conscience may have been stirred by superior movies, The Sorrow and the Pity, Shoah, but France was much slower to acknowledge the full measure of its complicity. And in the United States, Schindler's List in 1993 was a similar watershed. Though the Holocaust was not a central event in U.S. history, Schindler's List, even more than the Holocaust, made it into one by turning it into the basis of a Hollywood epic. Buying a ticket was treated almost as a moral duty. Schindler's List undoubtedly gave rise to a new I can never pronounce this word, pedagogical and commemorative impulse. It also, however, shaped to domesticate the Holocaust by making it a fixture of American middlebrow popular culture, which I don't mean entirely as a criticism, since that culture is better than a lot of the alternatives. But Hollywood trades in optimism, redemption, and healing, and in its rendering of even the most appalling realities, inevitably converts their dire facts into its own shiny currency. Thus, Schindler's List, for all of its unsparing and powerful recreations of the horror of the Krakow ghetto, is a story of heroism, resilience, and survival. And a great many of the mainstream Holocaust movies that have followed, including documentaries and some foreign films, have emphasized hope and overcoming rather than despair and destruction. When death dominates these films, as it does in The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, an apt successor to Life is Beautiful, it is spiritualized and rendered aesthetically palatable by an overlay of maudlin sentiment. More often, the reality of mass death gives way to another affirmation of life, and even faithfully rendered true stories are bent into conformity with familiar patterns, themes, and conventions. Forbidden love, noble sacrifice, victory against the odds. The Holocaust is more accessible than ever, and more entertaining. At the same time, it is receding from living memory, which may by itself explain the recent burst of cinematic and literary interest. The movies I find most interesting, most authentic, either address this painful process directly, measuring the distance between our time and the 1930s and 40s, rather than recreating that era faithfully in every detail, or else cleave to the particulars of a single story. Thus, Roman Polanski's Pianist and Lalo's Koltai's Fateless, though both tales of survival, register the absurdity and the abnormality of survival in the manner of the first-person literary works on which they're based. A Secret and One Day You'll Understand are meditations on what it means to remember. It is no coincidence that both take place in France, where the habit and policy of forgetting endured until quite recently. In those films full of unresolved feelings of grief, tenderness, and bewilderment, French Jews born after World War II try and figure out what the annihilation of their parents' world means to them. In both cases, the past is both painfully pressing and mercifully but maddeningly out of reach. And in both cases, the filmmakers explore not only strong feelings, but also complicated ideas. The sensations associated with the Holocaust have become perhaps too easy to evoke, given the power of cinema to dispense fear, pity, sorrow, and relief through sound, image, and pageantry. This has been the route taken by most English-language films about the Holocaust, and also some of the slick European counterparts, like Black Book and The Counterfeiters. But A Secret and One Day You'll Understand represent another strain in European and Israeli film, one that may reflect a deeper cultural difference. In the United States, the Holocaust is a mystery, a puzzle. The obsessive interest in it testifies to its intrinsic strangeness. In France, in Germany, and in Eastern Europe, it remains an urgent problem that needs to be worked out, in art, in politics, in the society as a whole. It seems right that movies about a difficult subject should themselves be difficult, but the fate of difficult movies with subtitles usually is to slip in and out of American theaters without leaving much of a trace. The big Holocaust movies of the big movie season will make more of an impression, allowing audiences vicarious immersion in a history that they nonetheless keep at a safe, mediated distance, even as they risk bathos and overreach in the process. We don't have to ask what the Holocaust means to us, since the movies answer that question for us. For American audiences, a Holocaust movie is now more or less equivalent to a Western, or a combat picture, or a sword and sandals epic, part of a genre that has less to do with history than with the perceived expectations of moviegoers. This may be the only, or at least the most widely available way of keeping the past alive in memory, but it is also a kind of forgetting. So it isn't all rainbows and moonbeams out there in watching movies. That's why I wanted to finish up with that article. You know, a movie like Zone of Interest is, I thought, a pretty staggering experience that delved into the Holocaust the way I'd never seen something delve into it before. And look, I'm sure in the next 10 years we're going to see movies. We've already seen one that won the Best Documentary at the Academy Awards this year of the conflict that's happening in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza right now. We'll see what goes on. We'll see how people come to grips with what's been happening all over the Middle East, what's happening in Sudan right now, what's happening in Syria right now, what's happening in Kashmir between Pakistan and India. Same as it ever was. Hopefully, I always have seen movies as a way to bring people together, to show us that we're we're not all that much different from one another. And it's better that we're here because, after all, it's a miracle that each and every one of us are here and we have such a limited time. Why be in a hurry to make that time end? But are we going to get movies that speak to us, that get us interested in history and get us interested in delving into the past? I would hope so, because judging by what social media has done to us, the past has never been more distant, and people have never known less about actual history than ever before. And in this day and age where data can be manipulated, hey, the truth, the real truth, even if that truth is fictional, has never been more important to preserve than it is today. Let me just check in and see. I didn't expect many people would have much to say. Thomas Logan says, describe your first watching Kenneth Johnson's V. It aired Sunday, May 1st at 9 p.m. Where were you? I was downstairs in my family room by myself. I loved it. I loved V. I have my Japanese box set of both miniseries right over there. I thought V was great. And there was a lot made of it. I have Kenneth Johnson's V novel. He actually wrote his own sequel novel. I thought that the first V miniseries should have been left alone. But it was such a big hit. We got V: The Final Battle, but it's got a great theme by Barry Dvorak, which is badass. But, look, once you're dealing with half human, half lizard biology, you've left. I don't think Kenneth Johnson would have done that. I really don't. It just got silly and ridiculous. And the TV series, they didn't know what they were going to do with it. It was all over the place. And I think the DC Comics series was better. And there was a whole spate of novels, too. And some of them were better than others. But I think that the original V miniseries, if you're going to do it right, was great. But back then, when something like that was on, I watched it by myself. And there's a lot of good stuff in it. Cool production value. I saw somebody online just the other day they 3D printed the alien fighters, and they made 3 3/4 inch figures. Well, after all of that, Shonen Kaiju says, been going through Verhoeven's filmography and appreciate films like RoboCop and Starship Troopers much more now in my older age, and it's because I've learned more about history and, yes, even politics. Well, that's the thing. Like I said, what's in that cave? Well, only what you take with you. The more you know. Speaking about the more I know, I did get a gift from Paul Bernardo. He sent me a box. Here it is. I don't want to show my address. I want to make sure everything's covered. Here is, wait, I can't even see if I'm doing this the right way. Wait, see? Oh, hang on. Hold on. It's hard to do this one-handed. Here's the box he sent me for my birthday. And there is a letter. Happy birthday, Rob. How's it feel to be the great, glorious 58? Hope it was a fantastic birthday shared by family and friends. I hope you don't already have some of these items, as I took my best guess. Either way, here's hoping you enjoy them. As birthdays only come around once a year, we try to make the best or most of it. As far as YouTube and the peeps on there, your birthday is every day. And that's special, right? It is. People are still wishing me a happy birthday. Thank you for your thoughts and prayers. I really appreciate it. Hope you're doing better. Paul actually had a minor stroke. And thank God for, and thankful for, as we should be thankful for every day that we're here, and thank God for that. Let's get back to work already. Keep moving forward. Catch you later. I hope I'm doing Blue Thunder right, if that's what that is. So let's see what's in this box, because to be honest, I just opened it. Ooh. The Quarry. Look at that. Xbox X. I have an Xbox X, and there you go. Wow, look at that. I don't even know what this game is. An Xbox game. It looks horrific. It's got a great cover. Is it horrific? Maybe not. It's got kids around a campfire. It looks like there's a killer. Let's see what we got here. The Outside Man with Anne Margaret, Roy Scheider, and Angie Dickinson. And love it. Love it. Thank you for that. There's lots of stuff. Dude, there's lots of stuff in this box. This is from Umbrella. Drive-In Delirium with a Vengeance. 100 and... This is the greatest thing ever. 157 action sci-fi trailers, uncensored and remastered in high definition. 157 trailers? This is awesome. And it's regions 1, A, B, and C. Oh my God. And you know what? Let's see on the cover. You got Star Trek, Supergirl, Blue Thunder, Firefox, the Blues Brothers. Is that Coffee? I guess it would be Coffee. And is that Ninja 3? Wow, this is dope. Then Gator, you got Burt Reynolds. Is that Superfly? Wow, this Forbidden World. Oh, Paul, I didn't even know this existed. This 157 theatrical trailers. This is the greatest thing ever. This is going right in the pile to talk about on Let's Get Physical Media. What else is in here? It's a CD. The Alan Parsons Project Definitive Collection. Look at that. And look. Signed by Alan Parsons himself. Signed. Alan Parsons is like, he's like a space. He's like, I love the Alan Parsons Project. Have you seen Lady Hawk? Look at that. This is a great box. And there's more. First of all, what's this? There's a Star Wars bookmark. Look at that. Empire Strikes Back, too, with a film frame. Oh, I wonder if I can see what frame it is. Oh, it's a frame from the very end of the movie when they're standing there watching the Millennium Falcon leave. Well, that's dope. Look at that. Wow. Wow, there's more stuff in here. Rebels on the back lot. This, I actually, you know what? I gave my copy of this to somebody and never got it back. This is a great book. I haven't read this book since it came out. Rebels on the Back Lot by Sharon Waxman. This is some good shit. Good. Now I have it again. Ooh, what is this? Oh, look at that. The Movie Book of Film Noir. Very nice. This will come in... I don't have this. I have books on film noir, but I don't have this. Wow, man. This is just a box of goodness. A box of goodness, Paul. Thank you very much for this box of goodness. This disc is incredible. 157 trailers. Who would have known? Not me, clearly. That is incredible. Now, I'm not even done yet. I am not done yet. I had one more letter to read. And I'm going to read it. And this letter comes to us from Wesley Majors. Wesley Majors. Dear Robert, I've been a fan of your work for a while now, and one of the things I appreciate most about your streams is the way you balance genuine enthusiasm with sharp, unflinching criticism. That's a rare thing, especially in a world of Star Wars fandom where people tend to either blindly praise or relentlessly nitpick. I feel like you strike a nice middle ground, and that's part of what keeps me coming back. For me, my own Star Wars journey started when I was 6 years old. My parents took me to see Attack of the Clones in the theater. I'm not going to pretend I was some hypercritical kid. I loved it. The spectacle of the clone army, the flashing lightsabers, the scale of it all, it blew my mind. But what really set the hook came a few days later, when I asked my dad if there was more Star Wars. He dug out his old VHS copy of The Empire Strikes Back. I still remember the exact feeling I had when I first saw Yoda lift the X-Wing from the swamp. That scene made the Force feel real, like anything was possible if you just believed. It's the kind of pure cinematic magic that sticks with you for life. I think that's why, like you, I feel like the franchise has rarely reached those heights since. Return of the Jedi has its moments. I get chills when Luke throws his saber away and defies the Emperor. It's the best part of the movie. but it never quite captured the same emotional power or mythic weight as the first two films. Then, of course, the prequels came along. Yoda turning into a CGI acrobat felt like a betrayal of everything that made the character special. At least we got that one scene in The Last Jedi where he felt like a wise, playful teacher again, even if it was just for a moment. Anyway, the reason I'm writing is because I wanted to ask you if you've ever read The Secret History of Star Wars by Michael Kaminsky. I've read it online. I've read The Secret History of Star Wars. I don't know if I don't have the book. If you haven't, I think you'd really dig it. It's a deep dive into the messy, sometimes contradictory way George Lucas developed the saga, pulling from over 400 sources, early scripts, interviews, production notes, and more. One of the most fascinating parts for me is how Kaminsky challenges the myth that Star Wars was this meticulously planned epic from the beginning. Oh no, it was not. He makes a compelling case that a lot of what we now think is the Skywalker family saga was more or less invented on the fly. Oh, it was. It turns out that a lot of what we assume was carefully plotted was actually the result of late-stage rewrites, creative compromises, and on-the-spot decisions. Yep. There's this huge gap between the public myth of Lucas as a solitary genius and the much messier reality of what it took to bring these films to life. Kaminsky even digs into how Lucas has retroactively rewritten his own history in interviews over the years, sometimes bending the truth to fit the narrative he wants to present to fans. It's a fascinating read, and I think it'd be right up your alley. Anyway, thanks for all the work you do. You've kept the fires of meaningful pop culture discussion burning bright, and I genuinely appreciate it. May the Force be with you, always. That's from Wesley. Wesley, what a great letter. Totally agree with you. The Secret History of Star Wars, at least it was online probably before it was a book. I think I was getting a photo. Did Dieter Bastian send me a photo? Let's see if he did. I don't know. Oh, The Quarry is a fun and spooky narrative game made by the Until Dawn team. It's about as good as Until Dawn with creepy moments, choices matter, and a decent horror story. Best enjoyed with a group of people voting on the choices that your characters make. Well, that sounds good to me. By the way, Dieter Bastian represents for a movie called The Ugly Stepsister. Dieter says it's an awesome movie and it lived up to the hype. 9 out of 10, going blind as usual. Norwegian production, shot in Poland. A lady at the helm wrote it too. And this has nothing to do with the Pooniverse or those Popeye movies. Style, atmosphere, score, acting, practical effects, top notch. Shot in 1/6 and fits too. Well, that's good. So there we go. I did put up Dieter Bastian's review. It's unfortunately not a great review. I mean, the review is great, but the review of the movie doesn't seem to be so great. It's on the channel. You can watch it. Let's Get Physical Media. Dieter's review of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Paul says he's glad I enjoyed the birthday gifts and I deserve it. Well, thank you for sending them to me. That was very kind of you. Our own Sonny Dominguez, who's been a member for 47 months, says, have you played Helldivers 2? I played some of it. I'm not much of a gamer, but got addicted to the game. It's so much fun. Starship Troopers, and you fight also aliens and robots. Totally agree. Yeah, it's good stuff. So I'm caught up there. Well, I think I'm going to end this chat. I don't know how many people stuck with me through the end of it, but I want to thank you all for being here. It was a long one. I knew it was going to be a long one. Look, you know what? I was looking for something to talk about, and it's like, how much do I have to talk about Star Wars? Do I have to talk about? I think I did enough Andor streams. By the way, I have to say tonight, I'm like, fuck. There's no Andor. What am I going to watch? I don't know. I was working on the True Noir. Hey, by the way, if you're looking for something interesting, you can always go subscribe. Get the True Noir. I busted my ass on it. 10 episodes. You know what I noticed? There's people on the IMDb that gave True Noir a 1. 1. Really? Like for Max's script alone and the actors. You can hate my guts. I can understand people giving me a 1. I get it. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. But the show itself, now beyond me co-creating it, directing it, producing it, editing it, overseeing the whole thing, you can't deny that the script is great and the actors are great. So, I mean, 1, hey, look, everybody hates everything at some point. I get it. But hey, True Noir, I'm very proud of it. And I'm working on, for those of you who've asked, I am deep into the soundtrack and deep into the Blu-ray. I don't know when I'll be entirely done, but you know, I'd hopefully like to be done in a month. There's a lot of work going into these things. I think they're going to be great. And hey, it might be crazy to make a CD soundtrack album, but it's a double album. And Alexander Bornstein, who did incidental music, by the way, the composer of True Noir, did incidental music on Andor. So we got some great pedigreed people there. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. So the people that obviously supported the Kickstarter are going to be getting that stuff. It's going to be really good. A-list all the way. And on that note, I'm going to end this stream. I want to thank all of you for watching. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank all the people that generously donate to this channel. We had a great member call last weekend. I got to see some new people. I finally got to put a face to Castle Grace Skull, which I love that name. What a delightful woman she is. And I'm going to hook her up with Dave Parker, see what happens. Woohoo! Because I can be a match. I can be a Yenta. I can do that. We can bring people. We can bring the Post-Geek Singularity together. I want to thank Brian Erdy for all that great work, showing us his collection. As a matter of fact, to go out, I'm going to play his collection video again. How about that? You want to see that video again? Beyond MySpace. If you came in here late, I'm going to show you Brian Erdy's great. You're going to recognize all these classic toys. It's a great piece of work, and he made this. And if anybody wants to make a video and send me your collection of stuff, I mean, you got a lot to live up to here, I'm just saying. But remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. Remember, right down there, you can see where to send me a letter. Write me a letter, put Robservations in the subject. And one more time, here is our friend, a member of this channel, and a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity, Mr. Brian Erdy, made this great video of his collection. One more time. That was lame. Hold on. Just wait a second. The thing did not, it crapped out. Both the signal and hang on. Don't worry. We're gonna get back to this in a second. Hold on. Let's try this one more time. Once again, Brian Erdy's Beyond MySpace.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
there is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
Although edited for...
Hey, I know I wasn't going to come back, but I figured I would come back because Zachary Zabeli sent in a super chat. And he says, personally, I can kill movies if I watch them too many times. What about you? Don't you ever get sick of a movie again and again? You know, it's an interesting question. Mostly because when I watch a movie a second and third time, I always think about myself in this way. I'm like, you know what? I'm depriving myself. I'm going to watch something I like again rather than watching a movie I've never seen before. And believe it or not, there are thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of movies I've never seen. So, you know, I used to think about that a lot. However, I really find that the movies that I like the most, like I could watch The Godfather and Godfather 2 and I'll be honest, Godfather 3. I never get tired of those movies, ever. I never get tired of all that jazz. I can watch all that jazz forever. You know, I love that movie. Amelie, you know, my favorite movies, Almost Famous, the bootleg version. All About Eve, Sunset Boulevard. You know, I could watch these movies over and over again. I never get tired of them, ever, ever, ever. Which is, you know, I mean, I always like to expose myself to new things, but it never ruins a movie for me. Because I'm always watching something different, to be honest. And I've often thought that I look at my ever burgeoning collection of physical media, and I think I have more physical media. I have more Blu-rays and DVDs and 4Ks than I ever had VHS tapes. I had a lot of VHS tapes. I had like 1,000 VHS tapes, and I sometimes I had 3 movies on a tape because I'd tape them in 6 hours because I had a lot of garbage, you know. But I made no apologies. But I have a lot of movies, and if I were to watch one disc a day for the rest of my life, I don't think I could get through my entire collection. Which, if you think about it, it's a little weird. And maybe I should cull my movie collection down to my 250 favorite movies that I'm just going to keep watching over and over again. And then if I get something new I haven't seen, well, you know, I guess I could watch it. It's weird. I mean, I'm getting to a point in my life where I look around at all this stuff, like all my books. To me, there's nothing sadder than going into a used bookstore. Because I see a lot of books that I have, you know, that are like, oh, that's kind of worthless. You know, unless Grady Hendrix comes along and writes another, instead of Paperbacks from Hell, like archival film books from hell. You know, it's wild. I mean, you look at all these books and you look at all this printed material, and what is its ultimate fate? If a book isn't being read, it's a little weird to keep it on a shelf. It's bizarre. If you think, like, I have literally thousands of books around me. And you can see on the bottom, like this row down here, or you can see like this row here and that row here. That's like the all around me are the omnibuses and stuff and the absolute versions, like tens of thousands of pages of comics. When am I going to read these again? I mean, I don't know. You know, I keep getting sent, because I'm old now, I keep getting sent life insurance policies. I don't have a life insurance policy. I think I need to get one just to pay for somebody to come clean all this shit out. I used to write, like, in case of death. I haven't written one in a long time. Who's going to get what? Please call this person. All my passwords, everything. Please scrub my internet browser history. Believe me, seriously. You know, no, there's nothing that salacious. Not you just, you know a little bit more about my peccadillos, but if you listen close, you already know them. But yeah, it's a weird thing. Like, how many times can you watch a movie? I don't know. There's some movies I just have never gotten tired of. I don't know why. But I know some people, it's a little weird. I mean, I think it's a person by person thing, and it's a movie thing. Like, you know, I do feel like it's like what Penny Lane said in Almost Famous. You know, you go to the record store and visit your friends. Like, I think like I know the Corleone family more than I know my mom. If you were to ask me more about their personality traits, that's kind of sad, but it's true. So I don't know what that says about me, but anyway, it certainly doesn't kill movies. And on that note, I'm going to end this very long stream. I want to thank all of you for bearing with me. I want to thank Brian Erdy for making that great video, and that's why I let it play at the end, because I realized the beginning kept getting cut off, which is weird. So thank you all for being here, and once again, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, send me a letter.